Hi, and welcome to a special legal education episode of Instavision. I'm Glenn Reynolds. Our guest today is Brian Tamanaha. He's a professor of law at Washington University in St. Louis, and more importantly for our purposes, he's the author of a new book called Failing Law Schools, about how law schools are, well, failing. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here, and it's kind of sad to hear that law schools are failing. Here's how law school used to work in the old days, and this is probably what most people think of even now.
Questioning and answering. At times, you may feel that you have found the correct answer. I assure you that this is a total delusion on your part. You will never find the correct, absolute, and final answer. You're on an operating table. My little questions are the fingers probing your brain. We do brain surgery here. You teach yourselves the law, but I train your mind. You come in here with a skull full of mush, and you leave thinking like a lawyer.
So, Brian, that was legal education sort of at its peak, right? Harvard Law School in 1973. What's gone wrong?
Well, I'd like to think I could live up to that, but we don't do things that way anymore.
The economics are interesting because one of the things about Kingsfield is he was really cheap, right? You've got this one guy standing up there. You saw this class full of students, like 200 students in that class, one professor, very economical. Now we have all these skills courses, and everybody wants small classes and a small student-to-teacher ratio and all, and that's driven up costs. But that's really not the big problem, is it?
Well, that's just a piece of it. It's not only that we teach fewer students, it's that we have more professors teaching fewer courses each. So back in the 1970s, the professors at many law schools taught 5 courses a year, 14 or 15 credits. Across the country today, it's unusual to have professors teach more than 4 courses a year. That's 12 credits. And at elite law schools, they teach 2 or 3 courses a year, and that ranges between 8 and 10 credits. So when you have professors teaching fewer courses, you need more professors. And in addition to having more professors, they each get paid a lot more than they used to get. So the combination is a lot more professors earning a lot more money, and you end up with Professor Bloat.
Professor Bloat. I think I had him for torts. No, but it seems like we do have this situation, and really, from the standpoint of the consumers, the students, the real problem is tuition has skyrocketed, way ahead of the rate of inflation, way ahead of family incomes, and they've been making the difference up with loans. And when the legal employment market looked pretty good, and when the debts weren't quite as bad, say 10 or 20 years ago, that worked. But we've just basically, have we just reached the point where the lines have crossed and it just doesn't work anymore?
Yes, I think that describes it. Let me encapsulate the problem. In 2010, the average debt of law students across the country, and about 90% of the students are in debt, the average debt was $100,000. The median salary was $63,000, and a graduate who earned the median salary could not pay off the monthly payments on the average debt. So from that picture, you can see that we're talking about thousands and thousands of law students. On top of that, over a third of law graduates in recent years have not even landed jobs as lawyers. So the situation is both that there are too many graduates per available jobs, and that among the graduates who are landing jobs as lawyers, they don't earn enough to pay off the debt burden that they carry.
Yeah, now see, when I went to law school in the 80s, we had LA Law, and that gave people a very rosy view of sort of what the life of a lawyer was. You had your Porsche, I love the litigator plates there, and you're driving around LA, the sun's shining, you're flirting with chicks in your rearview mirror. Life looks pretty good. And in fact, I think that show may have been part of the problem with the legal bubble. I think it drew a lot of people into legal education and law practice who otherwise wouldn't have come because they were expecting a fancy lifestyle. But now that's really not the reality for very many people, even who graduate from top schools, is it?
No, it's not. And Glenn, you and I graduated at about the same time, and my debt upon graduation was $20,000, and that in inflation adjusted dollars is about 35,000. Today they're graduating with over $100,000 in debt. So the salaries have gone up only at the upper end of the market. That's about the top 10% earners, the corporate law jobs, in which salary is now $100,000, $160,000, excuse me. But for the bulk of lawyers, the salary is essentially stagnated in real terms, essentially because there's an oversupply of graduates, and there's been a steady oversupply for at least 10 years, and I believe longer. I can only trace the numbers back 10 years because the statistical method that was used to compile the numbers was changed in 2001. As a result of that, for the bulk of law graduates, their income actually was not going up in real terms. Meanwhile, tuition went up astronomically during this period, and ultimately, that's what created the mismatch. Tuition went up at rates that exceeded inflation substantially. Meanwhile, pay didn't go up.
So and I think people miss that. People often will give advice to potential law students based on the way things were 10 or 20 years ago. And it's not necessarily that law school gives you worse career prospects, though actually I think now it does, but it's that the debt load you have to service has gotten so much worse. And I think people also tend to miss that, and you've got a terrific graph in your book that shows that the distribution of salaries is bimodal. You've actually got two peaks. You've got one real skinny one for the people who work at the top firms and make $160,000 a year to start, but you look down at the other peak, which is for pretty much everybody else, and the average is somewhere around $60,000. And people don't realize that the odds are they're going to be in that lower range, and they can't service all this debt. They hear these big numbers, and they think that's going to be them. And increasingly, even at the top law schools, that's not the case.
Right, that's correct. And that $160,000 median, about 10% of students nationwide get that, but that 10% is not evenly distributed. The elite law schools, 50 or 60% of their graduates land in those positions, but very quickly, and I mean outside the top 15 to 20, it drops rapidly down to 10% of the class at most land these jobs, and then at many schools, no one lands these jobs. So we've all been raising tuition essentially with the prospect of earning those $160,000 jobs when, in fact, a small percentage of students ultimately got those positions. I think it's also important to look at the legal market itself because it's changed. It's been changing as well in the last 10 years. Some skeptics of the argument I raise say, well, the per capita number of lawyers is actually going down. In fact, it is, but it was already too low to begin with. And in addition, the legal market is changing in a way in which a lot of low-end legal business is devolving away from the profession. There are many paralegals now who do no-fault divorce, who fill out immigration forms. They don't call themselves legal services, but they assist in filling out these forms. And in addition, these online providers like LegalZoom are taking away a big part of the low-end market. So it's not just that the very few people are earning high jobs. People in the middle, or the bulk of lawyers who could have gotten out with lower debts and made a living, now increasingly find that work is not available for them. So they're getting squeezed in all of these different directions.
So what's your advice to potential law students today?
I think the essential thing to pay attention to is the level of expected debt. If you go to a law school in which your debt, and in the book I give progressive levels, if your expected debt upon graduation is $50,000 or less, that debt will be manageable even if you don't land a job as a lawyer. And I need to emphasize that because more than a third of students today are not landing full-time, graduates are not landing full-time jobs as lawyers. If your expected debt is $100,000 or more, you have to earn about $100,000 to be able to manage that debt comfortably. And by comfortably, I mean even at $100,000, you'll have to exercise some financial discipline. If your expected debt is $150,000, and this is a real number. The law schools at the most indebted law schools, their graduates are coming out with debt, average debt in excess of 140,000. So if your expected debt is 150,000, you should be at a top 5 school. If you're not at a top 5 school, you are taking a very serious risk of ending up with substantial debt and salary insufficient to manage that debt.
And even if you are at a top 5 school, you're really limiting your future options because you have to take a job that pays enough to service that colossal debt.
That's right.
So what's your advice to law schools? What should we in the legal academy be doing to avert disaster? Or is it too late? Are we just heading over the cliff now?
Let me back up and say one more thing about debt, because these critics respond by saying, well, you're ignoring the benefit of income-based repayment. Income-based repayment is a program in which the federal government links your monthly loan payments to your income. So if you earn less, you owe less. Now that sounds like an attractive option. Unfortunately, it has quite significant negative consequences attached to it. And essentially what it means is that your loan balance will balloon very quickly because you're not paying even the interest on a monthly basis for that debt. And after 3 years, that will begin to compound. And so what essentially it means is that for over 2 decades, you'll live with this debt, and debt, which for many people it's called IBR, will actually be getting larger. And that debt will be factored into your credit score, which means you may be denied a home mortgage, or car loans, or if you do get loans, you'll pay a much higher interest rate. The reason I need to raise this is because many law schools are now selling IBR. And IBR, while well-meaning, creates distortions in the economic signals. And the distortion is that someone who essentially is not meeting the terms of the loan will nevertheless be in good standing. So we have an economic signal that things are working out when in reality they're not. In terms of what law schools should be doing, I don't know that it can be resolved internally by law schools. There are a significant number of law schools, and by that I mean 24 or so, that in my view are just economically unjustifiable. And by that I mean what they charge, the average debt that their students come out with, and what their graduates earn are unacceptable. And I don't know that their economic operation can change in a way to offset that. Essentially, law schools will be faced with gutting their program to be able to continue, and I don't know how many schools will voluntarily go out of business. The current decline in applications might force some law schools to do that, but short of that, they can continue to function despite having a significant percentage of graduates who do quite poorly after leaving.
It's funny, any other industry that put out a whole bunch of people with 6-figure debt that wasn't dischargeable in bankruptcy when they really had never had any reasonable prospect of paying it off would be called predatory. But so far, the academic world has escaped that. Your 24 number is interesting because I spoke at a panel last summer, and they asked the panelists to say how many law schools would be closed in 5 years, and I predicted 25, and I was the only one on the panel who guessed more than 5. But that was my number, and it sounds like that was not too far off as a prospect.
What's interesting about it is that the schools that will be in trouble are not necessarily those at the very bottom, because those schools are already taking in students who ought not to be in law school. It's the schools that want to maintain standards and that will be forced by the decline in applicants to shrink because the pool of applicants is simply getting smaller. It's declined by about 1/4 in the last 2 years. And the schools that hold themselves to having standards will then face a crisis of confidence at that point. They have to decide, do we want to keep running or take in students who in previous years we would not have accepted. Now, schools at the very bottom that essentially have open admissions, they'll just continue to take whoever applies. And I think it's a sad fact that there seems to always be enough people who, no matter how bad the odds are and no matter how much information there is, will take their shot at going to law school. It's for this reason that in the book I suggest that the decline in applicants alone will not solve this problem. Law schools have been able to raise tuition because people have been willing to come and able to come, and willingness is only one piece. The ability to come exists owing to the federal loan program. So long as the federal loan program exists in its current form, I think law schools will continue to operate, even if many of them shouldn't be in existence.
I notice you suggest in the book a couple of things, including capping the amount of student loan money that a school can get. And it really is amazing. I saw the Thomas Cooley Law School's graduating class from 2010 graduated with $91 million, I believe it was, in debt, just in one law school graduating class. I mean, it is astounding. So you'd cap the total amount the school could have, and then you were talking about maybe making schools where too many students are in income-based repayment ineligible for more loan money?
That's right. One of the things I suggest is that the current outcome test that the DOE applies to for-profit colleges should be applied to law schools. These are basically tied to having positive results from their graduates, one of which is that I believe it's 30% of the graduates need to be paying down their debt. A number of law schools, I'm guessing, because I don't have all of the numbers, but a number of law schools would fail these tests if applied to them. Now, these rules only apply to for-profits to begin with. They don't even apply to nonprofit universities. So the suggestion that they would apply to law schools, I think, is something that will have to overcome some opposition. But that's just one piece of it. The problem with that proposal is it will only deal with the schools with the worst outcomes, but that proposal in itself will not solve the problem of rising tuition. The only way to solve rising tuition is to take away the essentially the ability to get unlimited funds to support the desire of people to go to law school. Now, I propose two different caps. One is capping individuals, and the other is capping law schools, how much federal money they can take each year. The reason I in the end, prefer the cap to law schools, and first let's say we need to talk about how much money law schools are getting. There are many law schools in the country get in excess of $40 million a year from the federal government. Now, the reason I focus on caps to law schools, total amount of money, federal loan money a law school can receive, is that if we cap the amount that an individual borrower can get from the federal government, law schools can respond to that cap by simply taking in more students. And that will exacerbate the oversupply problem, the problem of too many graduates per position. Now, there are other market forces operating on the law schools to discipline them, and one of which is you can't continue to take in as many as you want, because your credentials will deteriorate. So to some extent, that will be controlled by the decline in applicants. But nonetheless, as I point out in the book, there are schools that have been expanding. In fact, Glenn, remarkably, under today's circumstances, we have 2 new law schools going online in next year and the year after. So as long as people are able and willing to come, I think law schools are going to keep taking in more people and people who shouldn't be in law school to begin with.
Well, we'll find out, but thank you for taking the time to talk with us about it. I think the bubble's going to burst, and I think it's going to burst faster and harder than most people do, but that's my prediction. I'm a generally pessimistic sort. But thanks again for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you, Glenn, and that actually might be an optimistic, but thank you for having me on.
I guess whether the glass is half empty or half full depends on whether you're drinking or pouring. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to Instavision this week. That was Brian Tamanaha. His book is Failing Law Schools, out shortly from, at Amazon and fine booksellers everywhere. And that's all for this episode of Instavision. We'll be on a hiatus during most of June, but we'll be back. And in the meantime, have fun on the internet. Thanks.